You think your product's ready for big box retail? Here's what 90% of people that I speak to miss. When they work with a big box retailer, if you're paying slotting fees or you're paying marketing costs on the front end, you're already losing. The retailer has to think that the product that you're bringing to the table is solving a problem for them. If you're not doing that, you've already lost the game. We had 7 businesses last year that were working with larger retailers. They had a smattering of independents on the front end, but they were working with larger retailers. They got an order from Walmart, Kroger, from Target, a few larger guys, and they weren't prepared for that conversation. They weren't ready for the negotiation on the front end because they didn't have the information that they needed. They didn't have their margins set right. They didn't negotiate with their manufacturers on the back end so that they could have that padding. Because what happens is that, not all the time, but some of the time, in our case, we've seen a lot of it, where a younger manufacturer doesn't have the inventory that they need at hand when that larger retailer places the order. So they go to the manufacturers, they take a loan out often, and they have that inventory manufactured. They send it to the retailer. The retailer trials it out for 30 days. And if the product doesn't perform in 30 days, you've already lost, because they're gonna charge you to ship that product back. They're gonna charge you for returns. They're gonna charge you for marketing costs. There's a lot built into that contract that may not get your view on the first go through or the second go through. It's usually a long agreement and there's a lot hidden in there. So it's the onus of the manufacturer, the brand, to have that prepared on the front end to be able to absorb those losses for that roll of the dice. Because at the end of the day, when you're in a larger retailer, your costs are going to go down usually as far as your retail price, because they don't want to have the highest retail price. They're going to want the lowest retail price. And so your margins are going to take a hit. And if your margins take a hit on the big box side, it's going to be a hard sell for the independents to keep that margin higher. And when you're looking online, when you're selling online, you might have to bring your costs down as well. So your margins in general are going to be lower. If you decide to go with a large retailer with a distributor, you're going to need to space out 20% for them as well. And then you're going to be making pennies. Pennies are not necessarily bad when you're selling millions of units, but to get to that millions of units, you need to go through a lot of hurdles and you need to have a lot of things work for you. And oftentimes there's some setbacks, and the setbacks can bankrupt a business if you're not prepared for it. So being prepared on the front end means having a large group of independent buyers that are able to absorb those losses and really take the inventory when it comes back, so you can have that constant flow. So I'm going to go through a few tips and kind of tricks and what we've seen over the years where you need to watch out for. Ever since COVID, we've seen a huge shift in the big box retail buyers to shift the risk from the big box manufacturer or the big box stores to the manufacturer, to the supplier, because they don't want to hold the inventory anymore. They don't want to pay on the front end and have big inventory sent in and then be on the hook for that and have to discount it and sell it through. So what they've done is they've added a lot of clauses into their contract that aren't so great for the suppliers on the back end. So one of those things to look out for is when you're shipping the product into the manufacturer, you need to know where it's going, how it's being disseminated out to the stores, and that you are not on the hook for any additional distribution costs. Because sometimes they have third-party companies that come in and do the merchandising and do the distribution. And that might be through their end, but you may be liable for that cost. So when you're doing that initial contract negotiation, when you're doing that read through, look for third-party merchandising and be aware that that's an additional cost that you might have to build in to your costs when you're selling at the wholesale price to those larger retailers. When you compare the margins, you're working with independent retailers already. So you're selling something at $5, they mark it up to 10, everybody's happy. When you're selling to a big box retailer, you might be selling it at $5 to that big box retail buyer. However, from there, the cost of logistics comes out. So it costs you 25, 50 cents to their warehouse. So then it drops down to $4.50 on your side. And then you're on for any kind of marketing opportunities. You have to go to their annual trade show. That's going to be another $10,000 to $15,000. So you're going to need to drop another 25 cents off each unit on that. And then you're going to have to work through their slotting fees. So they may require a free fill on the front end, and down it goes. So understanding that on the front is very important when setting your wholesale price, because if you go to the buyer and say my wholesale price is $5 without understanding the terms that they're setting, you may be letting a lot of money go on the back end and not profiting, sometimes losing a lot of money on the back when you go through that deal. So understanding that, making sure you're prepared for it, is the key to success there. One big box favorite tactic is to delay payments. So usually with the larger retailers, it's on 90 days. But at that 90 days, that's when you have to start asking for the money. We've had situations where with larger retailers that are very reputable, they still haven't paid after 120 days for some orders. Understanding that there's going to be huge delays on the back end to getting paid is very important on the front end when you're buying that initial inventory, because that is expensive. And that's going to be much longer than 30 days that you're going to put on your credit card. So understanding that when you're getting started and when you're putting that initial price in is very important to the longevity of building your business through big box retail. One of the big issues with larger retail orders that we've found is that they place an initial order, which is, a couple 100,000 units. Fantastic. However, they're going to have a 10 to 15% return rate from breakage, from spoilage. They're going to have some issues with stocking and logistics. Some get lost. You're going to have a good percentage of that you're going to need to account for, because hidden in that contract is going to be your liability for any kind of return or damaged goods. And you're not going to pay money to have them ship back broken units. So there might be a charge for disposal as well. So if you're selling through independent retail, as I said before, with the $5 to $10, that's pretty cut and dry. However, if you have to dilute that 15, 20% for spoilage and for breakage, you're going to have to increase that wholesale price to allow for that dilution, if that makes sense. One last item as far as dilution goes, dilution of your brand at scale. Because if you have a lifestyle brand, if you have something that's particular to a sport or to a hobby, and you've built a fan base online and people are looking for you, that's fantastic. However, when you're out in the retail stores, that product's going to get crumpled, it's going to get put behind other products, it's going to get manipulated, there might be ripped open packages. Understanding that you lose control of the product on the shelf when it's out there in the world is something that you have to understand, and you have to either prepare for by having an independent merchandising army at your disposal, or accept that it's not going to be perfect. So knowing that your brand, it may not be presented in the best way that you've found you want, is something that you have to accept if you're going to be moving larger at scale. Some of the new tech that's come through is the smart shelves, where they're able to discount product if it's not moving. So, they drop down the price as it moves. Most of the time that's on the manufacturer. Sometimes it's on the retailer. That's built into the contract. So you might split it with them, but there's a dilution of price over time with these smart shelves. And that's a way to ensure that the inventory is going to be constantly moving. So at the end of the day, it might be good for you and them. However, to build it into your price is also important, because you may have those pennies stacked up, right? And comes the summer time of year where your hot apple cider is not selling off the shelf as much, and you're going to have a much lower margin than during the winter. Standing that on the front end is important when making that initial negotiation. If you're selling direct into those larger retailers, that's fantastic, but sometimes they require a larger distributor, sometimes independent distributors, to put the product in the store and to merchandise the product off the shelves. To be prepared for that is important. So in the next video that I'm going to cover, it's going to be a day in the life of a retail distributor, what to expect from them, what they're going through on a day-to-day basis, how you can prepare your product to best help them, because at the end of the day, they're going to be your representatives in those stores. So you're going to want to make sure that they're happy and that they're putting the product in the right spot and displaying it with the best face forward. So if you got something out of this video, I'd appreciate your like and subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next one.